every single brand that you love, be it Nike, be it Apple, be it McDonald's, be it Adidas, is just one thing in economics. It's called a firm that's trying to survive in the beginning and then begins to grow, and keep growing. Hi, friends, welcome to Econverse. I'm Abrar and I'm a fellow student who topped in my GCSE Economics last year in Oman. On this channel, we make learning economics simpler, clearer, and hopefully a lot more fun. In this video, we are going to be looking at firms. Let's get started.
In this video, we are going to be looking at firms. So, when we look at firms, I think it's really important to understand that there are multiple stages of production in which firms can operate. So, there are multiple stages of production. So, these are stages in the economy or the sectors of the economy, as they call it. So, firstly, you have your primary, you have secondary, you have tertiary, and you have your quaternary. Tertiary and quaternary. So let us look at what each of this means. Primary basically means industries that relate to the extraction of natural resources. This could be stuff like farming, fishing, so on and so forth. Secondary usually involves the manufacturing of goods or using the natural resources to process them into something, and tertiary involves services or any kind of services that are being supplied in relation to natural resources, and quaternary usually relates to technology. So these are the different stages of production. When we look at ownership of firms, the ownership of firms can be in three ways. There could be a private sector, there could be a public sector ownership, that is a state owned enterprise, and there could be a joint ownership wherein both of them tend to own a bit of the firm. The sizes of the firms usually differ based on several factors. So, the size of the firm can depend on factors like age, availability of capital. So, you have type of the business that really matters, and then you have economies of scale, which matters, that reflects the scaling of the business, economies of scale, and then you have the size of the market. So these are all stuff that tend to affect the size of the firm, so the size of the market. These are all the factors that affect the sizes of the firms. So let's now look at some benefits of being a small firm. So when you look at a small firm, they can concentrate on niche products. Now these might be tailored to a very specific segment of the market. Then you could have a small size of the market, which is good if you are producing a niche product which you produce. So it has some benefits. So some firms may choose to be small because they want to serve their local market, they want to provide a personalized experience. So that is the next point, personalized preference. So you can meet personalized preferences of customers, so that could be really satisfying, and it could actually allow for those firms to charge premium prices, really high prices, and then they are quite flexible to market changes, and there's low technical cost. So there's not much of a cost to running the business or starting it, and then you can have lots of government support. Government support generally tends to be high because essentially these small firms go on to, when they become big, they can go on to employ loads of people. So the government generally tends to support smaller firms. Obviously, when you're a bigger firm, there's a lot of benefits. You can benefit from higher profits, you could benefit from a large market share, from market domination, so on and so forth. So these are the different types of benefits for each type of firm. Now let us look at the ways through which firms can grow. So whenever we talk about firms growing, the growth of firms can be in two main ways: internal or external. Now when we look at internal growth, there's essentially two ways. You can expand production or you can diversify production. What do I mean? So you can expand production by producing more, and you can diversify production by producing different kinds of products. So you can diversify into newer markets and new products. But when you look at external growth, there are these are basically mergers. What do I mean by mergers? Or some people call it integration. Okay, this is not the math integration, it's like mergers. It's basically ways through which firms join together or take over each other. So let's look at these different types of external growth now. So whenever we look at external growth, there are essentially a few types of mergers. Mergers can be of the form of vertical. What is a vertical merger? So essentially, vertical mergers are when you are merging with another company that produces the same product but is in a different stage. Same product yet different stage of production. If you remember, we looked at the different sectors of the economy or the different stages of production. That is for the vertical merger. When you look at the vertical merger, there are two different ways. It could be a forward vertical or it could be a backward vertical merger. So a forward vertical basically means that it moves ahead in the supply chain, whereas a backward vertical basically means it moves behind in the supply chain. So when you move behind in the supply chain, essentially you're merging with suppliers. Whereas when you move ahead in the supply chain, you are merging with distributors of the product. Then we look at the second type, which is horizontal. Horizontal is far easier. So horizontal is when they produce the same product and they're on the same stage of the production. So if you are a primary sector business, the other one is also a primary sector. And if you are manufacturing, they are also manufacturing. That's how it works. And last but not the least, you have conglomerate mergers. What do I mean by conglomerate mergers? So this is really interesting. It's when firms merge with other firms that produce totally different products. So for example, conglomerate mergers in the real world are, like for example, Amazon had merged with Whole Foods. These are totally different kinds of products. When you look at horizontal mergers, examples are Disney and Hotstar. And then when you look at vertical mergers, examples for forward could be eBay and PayPal. And then you have for backward Z Entertainment and then Dish TV. So these are some examples of mergers. Now let's look at one really key concept when we look at a firm that grows. Let's look at economies of scale first. What does economies of scale mean? So economies of scale is when production increases, it leads to a fall in the average cost or the unit costs of each product that is being produced. So when you produce more than the machine, but there is one key caveat here: when you produce more than the machine capacity, when you're dealing with capital, average costs eventually would start to increase because it is unsustainable. And when average costs actually rise, when average costs rise, you call it diseconomies of scale. So economies of scale is when average cost decreases, and when average cost increases with production, you call it diseconomies of scale. Let's look at one key diagram that explains this concept. So in this diagram, the vertical axis is the unit cost of products, and the horizontal axis is the output that is being produced, the quantity essentially. So these diagrams are somewhat like this. So firstly, let me draw a neutral diagram. So this is the LRAC. So what it basically means is it is the average cost curve, but the long run average cost curve. So when it moves upwards, what do you think happens? And what do you think happens when it moves downwards? Oh god. Okay, when it moves somewhat like that. So if you see, this is basically diseconomies of scale because the costs rise. And if you see, this part is actually economies of scale. I hope you can see that. So basically the costs tend to decrease. So the one that's below is economies, and the one that's above is diseconomies. Economies, diseconomies. So what this basically shows, if you see something really interesting in this, is that until a particular point, the average cost tends to decrease, but beyond a particular point, it starts to increase for any curve. So when it decreases essentially the average cost, you are reaching economies, but it is until this particular output level, because this level of output is the output that has maximum benefit, beyond which there could be certain reasons that cause diseconomies. So first, let us look at reasons for this side of the curve that lead to economies. So the reasons can be again internal, or they could be external. So when we look at some key examples of internal reasons for economies, they could be changes in production. Like for example, the method that's used to produce products can change. Then you could have some other internal methods such as new skilled labor. So skilled labor essentially improves the productivity and can lead to expansion and diversification, and there could be reduced wastage. Now this could significantly improve the expansion of products. So reduced wastage. And then when we look at the external reasons, there could be reasons such as the location. Whenever you're in a prime location that has good infrastructure, your costs tend to be lower. Raw materials can be closer. So raw material close. So whenever the raw material is close, there is lower logistical costs. And then you could have subsidies or even tax cuts. And then there could be tax cuts. As we said, tax cuts can again lower the firm's costs. So these are some reasons for external economies of scale. Now let us look at some reasons for diseconomies for which the average cost begins to increase. So the internal reasons could be reasons such as using old methods. So you use really old methods of production, which could lead to essentially higher average costs. There could be inefficient labor. So whenever you have labor that is quite inefficient, it tends to have an impact on the average cost. And then there could be trade union strikes or industrial action. Whenever there's industrial action, there could be a significant impact on the level of output. And that is it for the internal. Now let's look at the external. The external reasons could be perhaps even reasons like pollution, traffic can affect logistics. Then you have taxes. Now, pollution can affect actually the health of the workers, so that is one thing. And then the location can again work in the opposite way. The location may be far from the raw materials and so on and so forth. All this could cause diseconomies of scale. So we've looked at the reasons for internal and external economies and diseconomies of scale. Now, there are some really important advantages and disadvantages of each one. So, essentially, what we need to understand is when the average cost decreases, the firm tends to benefit. So, we need to know the benefits of economies of scale, and we also need to know how diseconomies of scale can be really bad for the economy. So, I think this is a pick of my notes which explains this quite well. So, let's look at them. So, when we look at buying economies of scale, essentially buying economies of scale basically means that the bulk buying basically leads to discounts. So, whenever the firm tends to become bigger, they can benefit from buying economies of scale, so also called purchasing economies of scale, which is when they're able to buy a lot of their raw material at discounts, which tends to have a big impact on the average costs. Then you have selling economies, so you have lots of distribution outlets which could lead to a lot of profit. Your managerial economies, which is when effective and efficient specialized workers tend to improve the production and lower average cost. Then you have labor economies where you have great workers. You have financial economies wherein you can borrow at lower interest rates, and this could significantly improve the firm's finances. You have R&D economies, which is when the firm becomes efficient through technology and research. You have risk bearing economies, which is when effective management leads to efficiency. And then you have the disadvantages of diseconomies of scale. So some of the key disadvantages are there's a lack of control, there are communication issues, and there could be poor industrial relations, such as relations with workers, with trade unions, and all these things could significantly cause diseconomies of scale. So in this video we have covered the topics of firms, economies, and diseconomies of scale, and we've looked at mergers and the ways through which firms grow, the ownership of firms, and the stages of production. We have covered firms.
If you think this video helped you understand economics better, make sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to join the Econverse. I'll see you again in the next video where we are going to be looking at how firms even produce the products that they produce.